Hello everyone. It is hold on one second. Okay. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to get the chat to pop up when I do these things. But I have no idea. I'm still trying to learn this software. So just bear with me for 1 second and maybe I can figure it out. But probably not. Yeah, I don't have no idea. Okay, so anyway, hold on. I might be figuring out something here. Yeah, I was trying to find the link, but I don't know how to or the however to do the chat. But anyway, I want to talk about tonight. It's Wednesday, July 6th, 8:29 p.m. First of all, there's like crazy stuff going on. Georgia Guidestones got blown up. So that's like, if you don't know what the Georgia Guidestones are, you have to look into that. That is like the New World Order's manifesto. It's all about eugenics, depopulation, forced birth control, all kinds of crazy stuff. That got blown up. So that's super symbolic. That's like the shot heard around the world on the New World Order right now. And then, of course, CERN is starting up. They've been closed down for a little while, and they just fired CERN back up apparently, and they're going to, I guess, do that, whatever, fire that up to unprecedented levels and try to open portals to other dimensions. But that's not what this is about. I have been wanting to talk about, actually, I haven't been wanting to. Our Lady of Kibeho, I have felt inspired today to do a video on, and it has been nagging me. It has been nagging me. So I figured I better get on here and do it. So here we are. Yeah, I wish I could figure out how to chat with you guys while I do these things. I'll have to come back to that. I don't know if you know, I use ManyCam Studio if you're a YouTuber and you know how to do the chat where I can chat with you while I do this, that would be cool. So anyway, here we are. Our Lady of Kibeho. If you don't know, the Blessed Mother appeared in Africa right before the genocide in the 90s in Rwanda, and she warned them. But there's something I want to draw attention to after I read through this apparition that I don't know that a lot of people had drawn attention to, and I think this is what I'm supposed to be talking about. So here we are. This is a little bit long, so just bear with me. It's informative though. Rwanda, known as the Land of a Thousand Hills, is a small country about the size of the state of Maryland, located in Central Africa, situated between Tanzania on the east, Burundi on the south, Uganda on the north, and the Democratic Republic of Congo on the west. Aerial views of the picturesque country present spectacular, lush landscapes, rich green vegetation, remarkable crops on the hillsides, amazing volcanic mountains, and a number of shimmering lakes. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, but recently has been counted one of the most successful African countries regarding development and national economy. Most of Rwanda's inhabitants make a living from agriculture and livestock, thus, almost all the land is cultivated. They were once part of German East Africa from 1894 to 1918. Like many imperialists, when the Germans arrived in the late 1800s, they began to foment unrest through prejudice in order to tighten their own control. They ruled through the Tutsi king and brought Hutu areas under their rule. However, the 1919 Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to surrender control of the region to Belgium. They were ruled separately under different Tutsi monarchs. Both the Germans and Belgians turned the relationship of the two ethnic groups into a class system which favored the minority Tutsis over the Hutus. The Belgians issued ethnic identity cards in 1926, causing a deepening prejudice between the two peoples. The dissension between them was essentially a class struggle and not a tribal conflict as it is often believed. And I think this is very important for our purposes today. It was a class struggle, not so much a genetic tribal struggle. The Tutsis ruled Rwanda in the early part of the century and were considered the upper class. The Hutus, as part of the lower class, were the object of discrimination, eventually leading them to rebel against the Belgian colonial power in 1959, forcing 150,000 to flee to Burundi. In 1960, the Hutus won municipal elections, causing thousands more to flee. When Belgium withdrew in 1962, Rwanda and Burundi became two independent countries. The Hutus continued to attack the Tutsis through the 1960s, killing thousands, triggering retaliation. Discrimination and struggles between these two classes persisted through the 1990s, as the Tutsis were being excluded from public service and military jobs. The White Fathers, an international missionary society of priests and brothers, arrived in the late 1800s amid all this tension. In 1900, they built the first Catholic church, the Church of the Holy Spirit of Save. In 1905, they reconstructed it with brick. The White Fathers were successful in their evangelization efforts, generating a fervent, faith-filled people and abundant vocations to the priesthood and religious life. The Bible was translated into the national language of, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, and 9 dioceses were created. Catholic religious orders and the diocesan clergy opened schools, universities, and banks. Rwanda became one of the African countries with the highest percentage of Catholics. Okay, and then let's scroll down. On November 28th, 1981, an event happened that would forever change the life of Alphonsine, who's one of the seers, and affect the lives of millions. She had just finished a geography test and was filled with an inexplicable emotions, confusion, joy, dread, and fear. Calming down a little, she went into the dining hall to serve. As she was filling water glasses, the same apprehension mixed with bliss arose. Then she heard a voice calling her. She went into the hall where she was being drawn. Her skin tingled and her hand trembled. A soft, sweet voice called out, "My daughter." Again the voice was heard, "My daughter." Then, to her amazement, the most lovely woman she had ever beheld emerged from the cloud, floating between the floor and the ceiling in a pool of shimmering light. She wore a flowing, seamless white dress with a white veil that covered her hair. Her hands were clasped in front of her in a gesture of prayer, her slender fingers pointing toward heaven. The barefoot lady was so beautiful and had such a perfect complexion that Alphonsine couldn't determine the color of her skin. She fell to her knees and asked the lady who she was, and she responded, I am the mother of the Word." Our Lady floated toward her without touching the ground. She asked Alphonsine, "Of all things in heaven, what makes you happy?" Alphonsine replied that she loved God and his mother and that they made her happy. Our Lady was pleased with her answer, telling her that she desired her schoolmates to have the same strong faith. Our Lady poured out, as it were, so much love upon Alphonsine that she felt she would be lifted to heaven. The Blessed Mother then asked her to join the Legion of Mary. She told the girl that she wanted to be loved by people everywhere so that she could bring lost souls to her son Jesus. Then she slowly drifted upwards and disappeared into the cloud's fading light. As soon as she disappeared, Alphonsine collapsed on the floor and lay motionless for 10 minutes. When she awoke from her stupor, she saw her classmates staring at her. When they all excitedly questioned her, she started to cry because she realized that Our Lady had departed. When she told them she had seen the Blessed Virgin, they started to laugh at her and mock her as they all crowded around her. And then I won't read all of it, but I'll read the important parts. The next day, one of the students, Marie Claire, led a group of fellow students in a confrontation with Alphonsine. As they began their attack, Alphonsine suddenly fell to the ground and stared at the ceiling in the same way she had done on the previous day. The change was so instantaneous that some of the girls were confused and made the sign of the cross. Marie Claire, the leading antagonist, glared at her in total disgust and disbelief. The others continued their verbal attack, laughing and waving their hands in front of her, but she was oblivious to her surroundings. When she awoke, she was overwhelmed by the love she felt, and this apparition was shorter. These two visions were the beginning of many more, and they were causing increasing furor. Marie Claire's confrontations and outright hecklings intensified. She had the effrontery to test Alphonsine during the apparitions, pulling her hair, twisting her fingers, pinching her, screaming in her ears. Um, and then there was a a second visionary. Let's see. So, because of the torture she was going through, she begs Our Lady to appear to other girls in order that they would believe her. And Holy Mary answered her prayers on January 12th, 1982. She appeared to Anathalie, a 17-year-old student. Um, and she couldn't see her, but she could hear her speaking to you. And she said, "My child, you must pray for the world. You must pray, for the world is in a horrible, way. People have turned from God and the love of my son Jesus." Our Lady then asked her if she would help save souls, adding that she would suffer much if she accepted the mission. She agreed wholeheartedly to this request, a task she continues to this day. "No one goes to heaven without suffering," Our Lady told her. "And as a child of Mary, you may never put down the cross you bear." Then, holding her rosary, the student knelt and received a blessing from the Virgin Mary before she departed. When she awoke, she was surrounded by friends and a few nuns that informed her she had been in the same kind of trance Alphonsine had experienced, and they believed her. On another occasion, Our Lady said to her, "When I show myself to someone and talk to them, I want to turn to the I want to turn to the whole world. If I am turning to the parish of Kibeho, it does not mean that I am concerned only for Kibeho, or for the diocese of Butir or Rwanda, or for the whole of Africa. I am concerned with and turning to the whole world. The world is evil and rushes towards its ruin. It is about to fall in its abyss. The world is in rebellion against God. Many sins are being committed. There is no love and no peace. If you do not repent and convert your hearts, you will fall into the abyss." There was more visionaries. I think Marie. Then on March 1st, 1982, Marie Claire fainted while walking in the gardens. When she regained consciousness, she found herself in a dark place that repulsed her. When she awoke from the nightmare, she found two friends supporting her, questioning her, and advising her to return to the dormitory. Unable to answer her friends' questions, the distraught Marie Claire began to pen a letter to her mother asking permission to come home. But before she could finish the letter, she fainted again and was back in the gloom. Out of the darkness emerged two ominous figures, warning her that they would return with others. When she awoke, she found herself on the floor in the chapel. In spite of this, she maintained that Alphonsine and Anathalie were the source of the trouble. The next day, as the class processed into the chapel, Marie Claire again lost consciousness. She opened her eyes. She found herself in a most beautiful place, a grassy plain filled with sparkling droplets of color. She then heard a gentle voice sweetly inviting her not to be afraid. All her doubts vanished, as she understood she was speaking with the Mother of God. Our Lady made her aware of her wrongful persecution of the other two seers. When she awoke, she once again found herself on the floor of the school chapel. 30 astounded students had witnessed Marie Claire in ecstasy. She was completely changed. Now she was constantly praying and tearfully asking forgiveness of the Virgin for her previous misdeeds. Under the guiding hands of Our Lady, her feisty, rude behavior ceased. During one of Marie Claire's visions, Our Lady told her that she had come to Rwanda because she was still able to find humble souls who were not attached to wealth. "Pray my Seven Sorrows Rosary to find repentance," she said, charging Marie Claire with the distinctive mission of propagating this chaplet. Vision, Hell, and Purgatory. In 1982, Our Lady conducted Alphonsine and Anathalie on separate journeys to heaven, hell, and purgatory. Before she led Alphonsine to the other world, she warned her that she would appear to be dead and that others would want to bury her. A few days later, Alphonsine did not appear for dinner. When one of the nuns went to check on her, she found Alphonsine quite motionless on the bed like a corpse. Many others soon arrived, the school nurse to take her vitals and assess her medical condition, a Red Cross official to conduct tests, a member of the Commission of Inquiry to note the facts, Abbot Augustine Masago, the spiritual guide, who later became a bishop, and 2 seminarians, along with the entire school staff. She was completely unresponsive and even too heavy to be moved by 4 men. The group concluded that she was truly with Our Lady on some mysterious expedition. They had no choice but to wait. 18 hours later, they were astonished to behold a suddenly wide awake Alphonsine, smiling and serene. She recounted to her eager listeners her experience of a dark place of despair and another place of laughter and joyous voices ringing praises to God. Anathalie was likewise escorted on supernatural tours. She was taken to a land of light, a place of communion, where she saw 7 angels singing indescribably beautiful hymns in praise of God. She was then led to the place of the cherished of God, where she saw millions of people with white garments who were happy, but not with the same degree of rapture as the 7 angels. They next traveled to Lezagora, I have no idea, a place of purification, I guess it's purgatory in their language, where the light was dim, the inhabitants of which were at peace but also suffering. The last place, hell, was a most fearsome hot furnace, where the only light was a shade of red that reminded Anathalie of congealed blood. Anathalie had to avert her gaze from the horrific scene of anguish and misery. When she awoke, she had to be carried to her bed, where she remained for 2 days without saying a word. Our Lady had instructed her to spend that time in silence, meditating on what she had witnessed. And here's what I really want to draw attention to: the warning. Perhaps the most significant vision occurred on August 15th, 1982, the solemnity of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. By that time, news of the apparitions had already spread far and wide in eager anticipation. Thousands of pilgrims descended upon Kibeho for the occasion of the solemnity, many looking for miracles, cures for themselves or for family members, answers to prayers, or spiritual healings. Entering into ecstasy, Alphonsine began to sing her accustomed song of welcome to Our Lady, but she stopped abruptly. 6 times more she began the song, but Our Lady interrupted her every time. Alphonsine was struck by the deeply sorrowful countenance of Our Lady. The Virgin was silent for some minutes, and then she began to weep. When Alphonsine asked why she was crying, Our Lady shed even more copious tears. Our Lady told her to sing a song that was to portend the seriousness of this particular apparition. Alphonsine began the song as directed. People are not grateful. They don't love me. I came from heaven for nothing. I left all the good things there for nothing. My heart is full of sadness. My child, show me the love. You love me. Come closer to my heart. The Heavenly Mother had come to ask for repentance, fasting, prayer, and her children were not responding. Suddenly the crowd heard Alphonsine's frightfully piercing screams. She was shown a river of blood, of decapitated heads, of corpses piled high upon each other, of untold destruction, torture, and hatred. So much blood. The horror continued to unfold before her tear-filled eyes as she saw 1 million headless bodies piled up in a vast land, and not a single living person to help bury the dead. As Alphonsine recounted the graphic vision, horrified parents left the scene, fearing that further descriptive words from the seer would traumatize their children. At the conclusion of the vision, the seer sang a song to Jesus, pleading for his mercy. The other 2 visionaries, Anathalie and Marie Claire, experienced the same dreadful vision on this day: mass murder, the river of blood, piles of corpses. They reported seeing a tree on fire, an open chasm, and a monster. The visions lasted for hours. The seers all wept, begged the people to listen to Our Lady's plea. They had to love and forgive one another, turn in prayer to God, who is more powerful than all evil. And of course, then we go into the Rwandan genocide. Our Lady had pleaded, but the Rwandans did not listen. In April 1994, President Juvenal Habyarimana was killed when his plane was shot down. Extremist Hutus blamed it on the Tutsis. Within 1 hour of the president's death, a bloody massacre unfolded, which was to prove the accuracy of the prophetic visions. The execution spread like wildfire throughout the country. It is estimated that in just 3 months, almost 1 million were killed, as the extremist Hutus targeted the minority and moderate Hutus. Militias set up roadblocks to slaughter them, many with machetes. Neighbors killed neighbors. Hutu husbands were forced Tutsi wives. The river of blood seen by the visionaries materialized as the Kagera River was used to dispose of corpses as thousands of Tutsis and Hutu political moderates were murdered on the river banks. The river carried the massacred bodies into Lake Victoria, creating a serious health hazard in Uganda. The New York Times claimed that as many as 100 bodies per hour were being washed ashore in Uganda or other islands in Lake Victoria. Bodies lay crumpled, some hardly visible among the piles of burlap sacks, cooking pots, and clothes. A mother whose child was still tied to her back, a young boy thrown over the torso of a man, another curled up in between the ashes of cooking fires, and everywhere there was blood flies. Finally, the RPF, Rwandan Patriotic Front, comprised mostly of Tutsi refugees from Uganda and refugees from Burundi, battled its way through the government-led conflict and slowly gained ground. While the morale of the government deteriorated, the RPF concentrated its fight on Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. They conquered the government's forces on, ironically, July 4th, 1994, a date now commemorated as a public holiday. And then it gets into the approval and all that. But here's what a lot of people don't understand, and that is this: America's secret role in the Rwandan genocide. Between April and July 1994, hundreds of thousands of Rwandans were murdered in the most rapid genocide ever recorded. The killers used simple tools, machetes, clubs, and other blunt objects, or herded people into buildings and set them aflame with kerosene. Most of the victims were of the minority Tutsi ethnicity. Most of the killers belonged to the majority. It has been compared to the Nazi Holocaust in its surreal brutality, but there is a fundamental difference between these two atrocities. No Jewish army posed a threat to Germany. Hitler targeted the Jews and other weak groups solely because of his own demented beliefs and the prevailing prejudice of the time. The Rwandan genocide, as genocideers, as the people who killed during the genocide were known, were also motivated by irrational beliefs and prejudices, but the powder keg contained another important ingredient: terror. 3.5 years before the genocide, a rebel army of mainly Rwandan Tutsi exiles known as the RPF had invaded Rwanda and set up camps in the northern mountains. They had been armed and trained by neighboring Uganda, which continued to supply them throughout the ensuing civil war. In violation of the UN Charter, Organization of African Unity rules, and various ceasefire agreements, and it gives the history, but it's very long. Let me scroll down. It goes on to explain how the CIA, U.S. officials knew that Museveni was not honoring his promise to court-martial RPF leaders. The U.S. was monitoring Ugandan weapons shipments. Instead of punishing Museveni, Western donors, included the U.S., doubled aid to his government and allowed his defense spending balloon to 48% of Uganda's budget. Okay. The U.S. was not fostering nascent democratic initiatives inside Uganda, surprise, surprise, this is what we do all over the world, while pressuring other countries, including Rwanda, to open up political space. Uganda's donors were allowing Museveni to ban political party activity, arrest journalists and editors, and conduct brutal counterinsurgency operations in which civilians were tortured and killed. This is what's going on in Ukraine. And far from seeking stability, the U.S., by allowing Uganda to arm the RPF, was setting the stage for what would turn out to be the worst outbreak of violence ever recorded on the African continent. Years later, Cohen expressed regret for failing to pressure Uganda to stop supporting the RPF, but by then it was far too late. And so obviously we did what we do everywhere, and we armed resistance to overthrow regimes for our political agenda, while the politicians line their pockets with money going over there in the name of defense. But that's not what I want to get to. That's an overview. What I really want to get to is this. And I find the name intriguing, Operation Crimson. And as we saw, the river turns to crimson blood. Operation Crimson Mist, electronic slaughter in Rwanda. And this guy is saying that, and this isn't the only source that I have found this on. This just looked like it was the most reputable one, but he proposes this. Spooks, meaning the CIA, now use technology in Baghdad that was proven on 1 million dead Africans in Rwanda. And this is in May 29th, 2003, which obviously was when we invaded Iraq. In the original title, American Mind Control in Baghdad. Operation Crimson Mist. During the late afternoon of 6 April 1994, a hail of cannon shells tore through the fuselage of a commercial airliner flying overhead central Rwanda. Several seconds after the blazing plane exploded on impact with the ground, killing President Habyarimana of Rwanda, President Nichiramuna of Burundi, and most of the senior government officials. In that fatal millisecond of time, the entire political command structure of Central Africa was decapitated, leaving the way open for Operation Crimson Mist, the most obscene terminal mind control experiment ever mounted by the United States of America against a sovereign nation. And so I really feel this is extraordinarily important to draw attention to right now, because everything that the United States has historically used overseas in times of war or in times of regime change or whatever, I believe is now most likely being used against the American people. So we have to be aware of this stuff. And I believe that Our Lady drew attention to this for a reason. Okay. The most obscene terminal mind control experiment ever mounted by the United States of America against a sovereign nation. That Crimson Mist has been used again recently on a smaller scale in Iraq is now beyond doubt. As Habyarimana and his colleagues made their death dive, a small group of American men and women lounged around in a large hut at the edge of a discreet gravel airstrip a few miles from the Rwandan capital, Kigali, temporary home for their 3 unmarked C-130 Hercules transport planes. And the other thing I want to say is it's now come out that the CIA is absolutely calling the shots and running the war in Ukraine, by the way. So this is all, again, coming to the surface for a reason. All crew members carried forged credentials showing them as atmospheric researchers employed by an authentic civilian American agency, but these were only for emergency identification if one of the aircraft was forced to make an unscheduled landing on unfriendly territory. For all practical security purposes, neither they nor their 3 large aircraft were even in Africa. When news of the crash came in over the VHF radio, one of the Hercules planes was swiftly prepared to take off. The flight engineer checked the attachment of the RATO rocket-assisted takeoff packs, while the scientists made final adjustments to a large microwave dish mounted on the rear loading ramp of the aircraft. And I guess that's supposed to be right here. It was this strange and esoteric piece of equipment alone that would directly contribute to the deaths of more than 1 million African civilians during the 100 days that followed. Though completely silent in operation, the single microwave dish had more killing potential than a whole squadron of AC-130 Spectre gunships armed with 50 Gatling cannons. Though officially tagged an experiment, none of those present had any doubt that this was merely a cosmetic cover for the gruesome operational work ahead. Each member had been carefully vetted and then vetted again by U.S. intelligence to ensure that they had the right stuff and were philosophically committed to 2 objectives. First was the evolving need to control or eliminate political dissent by remote means in the run-up to the 21st century, and second was the need to stem or reverse massive population increases across the world. And so just hold on a second. And second was the need to stem or reverse massive population increases across the world, which threaten to overwhelm existing natural resources, especially water and food, which we all know is a lie and it's this whole Green New Deal nonsense. Intrinsically, this required a willingness to commit mass murder, and everyone present had passed this critical test with flying colors. As the Hercules engine started with a roar, American agents in Kigali were working alongside local civil servants and members of the Rwandan security service, ramping up public suspicion about foul play in the presidential air crash. Urged on by the corrupt officialdom, Houthi tribesmen started marching on Tutsi tribesmen and threw a few rocks at them. Innocent enough at the onset, although with a few nasty machete cuts here and there. But then the C-130 Hercules made a carefully calculated pass directly over the advancing Hutu, and they suddenly went berserk. Eyes glazed, the mood of the Hutu crowd went from simple anger to uncontrollable rage, and within minutes, hundreds of assorted Tutsi body parts were flying through the air. What the Hercules crew had just achieved had been an open secret since the late 50s, when researchers accidentally discovered that there is a precise control brainwave for literally everything we do and for everything we feel. The problem back then was that each of these control brainwaves, rage, fear, panic, lethargy, vomiting, and so on, had to be transmitted with an accuracy taking out to 3 decimal places, or they simply did not work at all. But as the years rolled by, and with the advent of transistors and microprocessors, the operational application of precise control brainwave became practical reality. It is important to note here that the lethal trick, repeated hundreds of times by the C-130 Hercules in Rwanda during April and July of '94, was not classic mind control in the ultimate conspiratorial meaning of the term, i.e., where people claim to hear complicated messages inside their heads, or where it is feared that the NSA or similar intend to turn everyone into helpless zombies by implementing electronic chips in their arms or neck. What the C-130 crew were actually engaged in was electromagnetically augmenting a pre-existing state. Remember that the agents and security service personnel first had to point to the Hutu tribesmen in the direction of the Tutsi. And so this is happening with the media right now in America with social media. And then I have to just bring up the fact that how advanced has this technology come since the 90s? What about 5G? What about all this massive, grid of electronics that we live in? I mean, it's not good. Okay, so remember that they had to points in the direction. Only then could the C-130 go to work with the precise control brainwave of rage, augmenting and thus upgrading crowd behavior from that of angry demonstrators to uncontrollable genocidal maniacs. Although not classic, this was and is unquestionably mind control for the simple reason that external means were being used to force an irresistible change in behavior. For those who really want to know how governments or agencies change public behavior, on a whim, the explanation is not too complicated, though obtaining details of the classified control brain frequencies is all but impossible. Various academics have actually demonstrated that some of these effects quasi-publicly over the years, which provides hard reality for skeptics. One of the leading lights in this field is Dr. Elizabeth Raucher Buys, who was a nuclear scientist and researcher at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Stanford Research Institute, professor of physics at John F. Kennedy University of California, research consultant to NASA and the U.S. Navy, and members of all these. She identified specific frequency effects to induce nausea, happiness, and many other behavioral states decades ago. And she is an enthusiast. She says, "Give me the money in 3 months," she boasts. "I'll be able to affect the behavior of 80% of the people in this town without their knowing it. Make them happy, or at least they'll think they're happy, or aggressive." Unlike many researchers, she tends to be open about her work and has demonstrated the effects many times in quasi-public forums and claims to experiment only on fully informed people. Many years ago, during one memorable demonstration in California, she turned a specific brainwave on all students in the left side of her auditorium, whereupon their teeth started chattering collectively and uncontrollably. When the unaffected students on the right side of the auditorium suggested this might be some sort of trick, she calmly turned the specific brainwave on them instead. The right side now suffered the exactly the same fate, watched by the sun, but no longer affected students on the left side. And they get into how it works, and it's this ELF, extra low frequencies. The main problem, they say, lies in the delivery of these brainwaves to the target because they all lie in the extremely low spectrum. And all control brainwaves in an even narrower central bands. They are effectively the same as Earth frequencies, meaning that they are very hard to direct via conventional radio transmission. Remember that in order to be effective in selective crowd behavior augmentation, you must be able to restrict delivery to clearly defined crowds in clearly defined areas. This is achieved by using an extremely high frequency microwave beam, which is then amplitude modulated at exactly the same rate as the desired control brainwave. This is much easier to explain with pictures, so take a good look at the diagram below, which is right here. And then he talks about Baghdad looting. Okay, so where the American mind controllers score with their airborne and truck mounted equipment is by using microwave aerials that can be adjusted in exactly the same way you would adjust the focus on a variable beam flashlight. How this is done is shown in the second diagram to the right. In the Rwandan Hutu tribesman example shown near the start of this report, the crew of the C-130 Hercules only needed to know the width of the target crowd on the ground and the width of their own microwave beam at any given altitude in feet. With those values available, it is then a simple matter to adjust beam width to accurately bracket the target crowd from any altitude chosen. Baghdad looting. But this equipment is not just deployed in large lumbering Hercules transport planes. During recent weeks, European security experts have concluded that smaller versions of Crimson Mist were recently deployed on the streets of Baghdad, designed in part to augment the media propaganda line that Iraqi citizens are dangerous savages, all badly in need of direct supervision by democratic American authorities. That's a joke. One classic example of this was the looting of the Baghdad Museum, apparently by a crowd of undisciplined rabble, but video footage tells a very different story. To pull off this stunt, the American authorities needed to assemble a crowd, managed quite easily with a promise of free food. Then they needed to place the crowd outside the museum, which again was easy because they located the free food outside the museum itself. Next up, the attention of the crowd had to be drawn to the museum itself, which was achieved in spectacular fashion by firing two 120mm shells from an Abrams tank gun straight through the main doors. Fine so far, but how to get them inside? The video shows two soldiers gesticulating to the crowd, urging them to go in and help themselves, thereby clearly identifying and this. Okay, so what did we just see with the whole January 6th thing, right? They were let in. The attention of the crowd was drawn to the Capitol building. They were let in. And so I'm just saying, y'all, like, I don't go to events. Like, I won't go to the March for Life. Like, I don't go to these things because there's too many sketchy things out there. There's too much sketchy technology and too many bad people looking to set good people up. All right, so the video shows two soldiers gesticulating to the crowd, urging them to go in and help themselves, thereby clearly identifying the target Rwanda style. Then it starts to get really interesting. The two soldiers rapidly withdraw, leaving the Iraqis standing leaderless outside the open doors, and then click. Just like flicking a light switch, the entire crowd goes nuts absolutely simultaneously, which never happens in real life. In the real world, there's always a leader visibly stirring up the crowd and preparing them for action, but not outside the Baghdad Museum. One second, these folks are dull, hungry Iraqis. Next second, they are instant, uncontrollable maniacs streaming in through the museum doors. It is also suspected that the same equipment was used to augment the looting attacks on various hospitals around central Baghdad, though this claim seems to be based as much on logic as it is on video footage. These so-called looters are Iraqi citizens who received essentially free health care in the hospitals under Saddam Hussein. Not only that, but their wives and children were being bombed and shot by Americans, meaning that their free hospitals are absolutely essential to them, and thus the very places they would normally defend in the first instance. Bearing this logic in mind, it seems likely that the European security experts are also correct in this claim. Homeland Security. Well, there's unlikely to be very much concern in America, Britain, and Australia for the plight of the Iraqis on the streets of Baghdad, it may be time to examine what is likely to happen in our own democratic countries. If things get more out of control, remember this was written in 2003, if things get more out of control than they are at present, remember that 2.2 million strong demonstration in London just before the illegal invasion of Iraq had little, if anything, to do with the English folk like Saddam Hussein. Iraq was merely an excuse for this unprecedented mass of human beings to migrate to London, waving banners that mostly read "Not in our name" at corrupt politicians. The chances are, he ends it with this, the chances are that in all affected Western countries, politicians and their real masters will try to invoke the use of highly unconventional weapons in order to try and save their own worthless hides. How successful they might be when that day comes, as it surely will, is largely up to you. And so you see here the full extent, and this is just a small, I'm sure, a small bit of information of what's actually out there and what they're actually employing against the American people right now, to cause the lawlessness that we see. And many of the prophecies throughout Catholic history have said, before the purification, so to speak, there will, and even scripture itself, brother will rise against brother. And so my advice would be to pray, and prayer in the Eucharist and being in a state of grace is our best protection against anything, and especially these frequencies and these weird demonic weapons that they have. And just be aware, because the more you know, the more control you have over your ability to react and things like that. So essentially, what this does is ultimately disrupt somebody's free will, although they have to be set up first, is from what it seems like. So know the warning signs. Stay away from these events. Stay, like, I would never ever go to the Capitol protests that they had, like things like this. You have to stay away from these things. Stay away from the gun rallies. Stay away from this stuff, y'all. I'm telling you. You don't want to be anywhere near this stuff. You don't even want to be anywhere near DC right now. So yeah, crazy. I just found that so interesting, because I think Our Lady came obviously to shed light on this for a reason. This is going on everywhere. This is absolutely happening in Ukraine right now. This is happening to the American people. This is probably happening all across Europe. Be aware.